Hello, I'm Alice Hutchinson, the owner of Birds Books, an independent bookstore in Bethel, Connecticut, and I'm honored to be the host of Write America. The aim of this series is to help set the country back on a correct, productive course of freedom, justice, equality, and plain human kindness. Write America is a literary series created by author Roger Rosenblatt, featuring award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers in readings and conversations each week about how books and art might bridge the deep divisions in our nation. Write America celebrates the quiet power of art in our lives, the unifying power of the highest uses of language. In novels, stories, essays, and poems, we recognize one another as parts of the human family, one family. Roger Rosenblatt, the creator of Write America, puts it this way: writing makes justice desirable, evil intelligible, grief endurable, and love possible. So welcome. And please join us every Monday evening and special nights like this one, as many of the most beloved and distinguished writers in the country read from their works and talk to each other and with you in an effort to bring us together. If you missed Monday's episode with Ursula Heggie and Vijay Seshadri, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Birds Books Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. Tonight's episode is also being recorded, so if you missed something, you can go back and rewatch. Tonight, Birds Books hosts a very special evening with Billy Collins and Robert Reeves as they celebrate the life and work of Frank McCourt. For those of you unfamiliar with Crowdcast, I see that many of you have discovered the chat to the right of your screen. Please feel free to comment during the evening. The link to the Write America page on our website is at the bottom of the screen in green, so you can check out the schedule and hopefully join us for another one. Since we are ending the episode tonight with a video, I want to thank Billy Collins and Robert Reeves in advance for participating in Write America this evening. And to all of you who turned in tonight, but particularly to Roger Rosenblatt for creating this original and important series to look forward to each Monday evening, and for coming up with the wonderful idea for this evening to celebrate his dear friend, Frank McCourt. Now a little about our two special guests. Billy Collins is the author of 12 collections of poetry, including The Rain in Portugal, Aimless Love, Horoscopes for the Dead, Ballistics, The Trouble with Poetry, 9 Horses, Sailing Alone Around the Room, Questions About Angels, The Art of Drowning, and Picnic, Lightning. He is the editor of Poetry 180, A Turning Back to Poetry, 180 More, Extraordinary Poems for Every Day, and Bright Wings, an illustrated anthology of poems about birds. A former distinguished professor at Lehman College of the City of the University of New York, Collins served as Poet Laureate of the United States from 2001 to 2003, and as New York State Poet from 2004 to 2006. In 2016, he was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His latest book of poems is Whale Day. Our second guest this evening is Robert Reeves. Robert Reeves is an associate provost of Southampton Graduate Arts Campus. Robert Reeves leads the development and expansion of a graduate education in creative writing, theater, film, visual arts at Stony Brook, Southampton. Reeves founded the Stony Brook Southampton MFA in Creative Writing and Literature and presided over the program's dramatic growth. He recruited the nation's premier creative writing faculty, expanded the prestigious Summer Writers Conference across a range of creative disciplines, and established the award-winning National Literary and Arts Journal, TSR, the Southampton Review. Reeves is the author of 2 critically acclaimed novels, as well as screenplays, short fiction, essays, and literary criticism. He had taught at Harvard and Princeton and holds a BA and MA from Harvard University. The man they are here to honor is Frank McCourt. Frank McCourt lived from 1930 to 2009, was born in Brooklyn, New York, to Irish immigrant parents, grew up in Limerick, Ireland, and returned to America in 1949. For 30 years, he taught in New York City high schools. His first book, Angela's Ashes, won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Los Angeles Times Book Award. In 2006, he won the prestigious Ellis Island Family Heritage Award for exemplary service in the field of the arts, and the United Federation of Teachers John Dewey Award for Excellence in Education. I would like to welcome to the screen Billy Collins and Robert Reeves. Let me snag you guys. Thank you, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Hi, Billy.
Hi, Roger. Robert, how are you? Thinking about Roger, who
Well,
put this
we are
whole
going
thing
to
together.
be thinking about Roger a bit, and it's I don't think of a better way of spending an hour than recalling Frank and talking about him. And so, I'm happy we're doing this. So, I wanted to thank Alice and Bird Books for continuing this series. They really stepped up. And of course, I too want to thank Roger, my longtime friend and colleague on the faculty here, for building this series. If I had known Roger had such administrative abilities, I would have put him to work a long time ago. And finally, I want to thank Roger for, in 2002, inviting Frank McCourt to the Southampton Writers Conference, where we first got to know him. It's hard for me to remember how extraordinary Frank was. He was always the best storyteller, so telling stories about him, you always feel like you're starting out second best. But to help us remember, we have come with some audio visual. We are going to have some video clips. We have some excerpts from a very special issue of the Southampton Review from 2010, which is like 200 pages of tributes to Frank McCourt and full of photographs. And it was assembled by Luann Walker, who was the editor-in-chief and amazing person. But before we do clips, maybe we'd just ask Billy to talk about, we got to know Frank during the height of his celebrity. I don't know if you met him then or before, but tell us a bit about it.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I felt really, honored, yes, but just more personally thrilled to be put together with Frank at the Southampton Writers Conference and actually kind of be a roommate in the same guest house with him and wake up and have coffee with him and then have wine at 5 o'clock or whatever. So that was, to get into close quarters with him and become a friend was an amazing experience. But the first time I met Frank, he didn't know me. I knew him. It was at a reading he was giving I was sponsored by the Hudson Valley Writers Center, and I was kind of friends with that center and an active supporter of it. And it was it took place in one of those big Hudson River mansions. I think it was Lyndhurst or one of them. And so it was a rather glorious setting in a summer afternoon, and people were there outside, and they asked me to introduce him. So I never met him before. And I did something you're never supposed to do when you're introducing somebody. And after I said this and that about him and praised him and talked about, this is after Angela's ashes. So he was instantly, like Byron, he woke up famous after Angela's ashes. He became I'll read something about his comment on the instantaneous fame or celebrityhood that he was launched into. But I said the usual things. Oh, so anyway, there's a trilogy, right? There's, just to set that clear, that was Angela's Ashes, and then Tis, and then Teacher Man. And it was after Angela's Ashes and just before Tis. And he ended up reading from Tis, although I don't think it had been published yet. Anyway, I did the usual introductory things. But my mother had died a year and a half before this reading, so that was still fresh in my mind. And the last thing she read, and she was an inveterate reader, was Angela's Ashes. So I mentioned that as a way to end the introduction. And I had a sentence that I really worked on. And the sentence was, I'll read it now. The sentence was that it's a special treat, because I mentioned that my mother had just read Angela's Ashes and not died of it, but died after it. I said it's a special treat to introduce the man who gave the woman who taught me how to read her final literary pleasure. And Frank McCourt. And then there's applause. As he walked up and we passed, he shot me a look, which was like, get out of my way. You're not supposed to, get the crowd emotional, because I think we both had an ear for applause. You get that as applause monkeys, as someone called us. But he recognized, he recognized that I did something that was drawing attention to me and my mother and all that. So he shot me this look that I was doing more than an introducer should, and taking his space. I think he had a very clear sense of the stage, which he developed probably in the classroom. And but during that reading, and we're going to talk about not just his fame, but also his uncontrollability in giving readings. When he read from Tiz, I don't know if you know Tiz, he's coming back to America as a young man. And the sequence that he was reading was about going into a movie house and having a bottle of soda with him. And he couldn't get the soda open, though, because he didn't think to bring a bottle opener to the movies. And so he took the bottle into the men's room at the movie theater, and he's struggling to get it off, and it explodes in his face, and he has to go back. Well, he was, when he read it, as he was reading it, he lost it. He started laughing. He started doing what you're never supposed to do, which is laugh at your own stuff. But he was clearly out of control, and Ellen was there, and I noticed from the comments, she's here tonight, which is wonderful. And he was looking at Ellen helplessly, like, what do I do now? And it kind of brought the reading to a stop. But it was usually, if you laugh at your own stuff, you're not letting the audience laugh. And most good comedians, I mean, if you think of Jack Benny or people like that, are just masters of this poker face, or George Burns, but it's really dating me there. But with Frank, it was charming. It was amazing to see that his writing really amused him insanely, to the point where he really couldn't. It was a hard time continuing. And I think at some point in our broadcast tonight, we have a clip, and I think it's another occasion where Frank overcome with laughter.
Yeah, we do have actually a clip. We were not going to lead it, but we can certainly, start with that. But he was reading a passage from Angela's Ashes at the conference, and it was the same helplessness, also the same sense of joy in what he had built, and it just seems charming. When I laugh at my own jokes, it does not seem nearly as charming. But maybe it's a short minute or so clip, but show Frank cracking up at his own work and helpless.
The next worst thing is to be out in the backyard, filling the kettle from the tap with the moon beaming away, and Kathleen Purcell from next door perched up on the wall looking for her cat. God, Frankie McCourt, what are you doing? In your grandmother's dress. And you have to stand there. Stand there with the kettle in your hand and explain how you washed your clothes, which are hanging there on the line for all to see. And you were so cold in the bed you had to put on your grandmother's dress, and your uncle Pat, the abbot, fell down and was brought home by Aunt Aggie and her husband Peg Healy, and she drove you in. She drove you into the backyard to fill this kettle, and you take off this dress as soon as every the clothes are dry because you'll never have anything. That's broadcast on this fall.
Well, that's a vivid demonstration of what we're talking about. And as you said, Bob, he's violating this kind of rule about comedy, but he got away with so much. And we wanted to talk a little about his fame, which came on him. Well, first of all, instantly, and second of all, quite late in life. He was 64, I think, when Angela Has Ashes was published. It could be a date off, but in his 60s, and I think he was 65 when the next book came out. But he, I guess people would say, well, he wore his fame lightly, but in fact, he really didn't, because he liked talking about it all the time. It was one of his favorite subjects. But and again, in another person's hands, you think, why is this guy rattling on about how famous he is? But with Frank, it was always with a kind of touch of irony, and everything he did. I mean, he did so many. He was celebrated around the world, but he always had that sense of a wink about it, like, look at me, I'm getting out of a limo, and. So I think it was an amazing way to handle fame. Seamus Heaney was also called, he was called Famous Seamus because of his celebrityhood. But Seamus Heaney said one has to learn you have to learn how to survive your success. And Frank had a way of handling his success, which just made him more likable and more lovable.
Yeah. Well, Billy, you know a little bit about handling celebrity yourself. So you are somewhat expert on that. Yeah, we have actually another clip. Frank, it was kind of a running joke in the conference year after year that Frank was the big shot, and he kind of enjoyed it as much as everyone else and kind of continued for a time. The other thing we had going on conference were this history of very Baroque introductions. And so finally, at the kind of zenith of this possibly silliness, I mean, it kind of converged with Frank the Big Shot and our over-the-top introduction. So the premise of the clip you're about to see is that Frank the Big Shot is too important to actually appear in the reading hall to introduce Roger Rosenblatt. So his introduction has to be live streamed from elsewhere. So when the audience is on the stage, we project onto the screen, and it kind of explains itself.
Good evening. My name is Frank McCourt, and I'm sorry I can't be with you this evening to introduce Roger Rosenblatt. I'm on a project at the moment, making a film. It's quite demanding. I thought I could get back, but I find that sometimes when I'm shooting, there's a change in weather, there's a change in lighting, and then the script rewriting, which I have to do. As a director, I'm responsible for every single moment, every frame. Thank you very much. So I just want to tell you something about Roger Rosenblatt. He's quite a distinguished essayist and professor, and one of the guiding lights of the Southampton writing workshops. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm quite unhappy, but I know Roger will understand, because Roger, being an adaptive and a flexible human being, knows that the central event of this evening is not me, who is introducing, thank you very much, who is not introducing, but Roger himself. He is the main event. He knows that. He always knows that. He was kind enough to ask me to introduce him. Now, I didn't know that I was going to have this project. So I want to wish all of you a good, entertaining evening. And as I say, I'm so unhappy, but perhaps next year, if Roger invites me back, I'd be glad to introduce him. Thank you very much. I'm wishing you a very good evening, and to you, Roger, have a nice, eventful, amusing, and witty evening, and perhaps we'll meet later for a glass of the very best wine that Southampton College has to offer.
That's a hard act to pull off, to make fun of celebrityhood when in fact you are a celebrity. To kind of camp it up in that way.
Yeah, and he clearly enjoyed it. And just to let you know, another detail is the jacket he was wearing was my jacket. And to honor him for years afterwards at our MFA graduations, the person who awarded the degrees would wear the jacket. It was the McCourt jacket that gave special powers to the new graduates. And we did that for a number of years. So yes, he clearly enjoyed it. Do you have a sense of, I'm kind of wondering, celebrity hurts a lot of, writers, young writers. In one book, I think he was 67, but certainly late in age. But why didn't harm him? Why was he, I think, able to pull it off?
Well, I think it was partially because he was in his 60s. Early fame has its perils, and if it comes too early, the writer can become burned out or incapable of besting himself or herself. I don't know why we expect writers to get better as they go along. Often there's a first novel that's brilliant, and then nothing. The second novel is unfairly, I think, compared to the first, and it creates this sense of that the rest of the career is going to be downhill. Most of the people I know aren't getting any better. I'm not. So I don't know why we expect writers to write better with every book. But I also think it was just this charm, you could say, a charismatic, boyish. He was a boy, in a sense, with the joy of a boy, ready to be delighted, as I like to say, and extraordinary level of likability. It reminds me of the Will Rogers thing about I never met a man I didn't like, and Jeff Dyer turns that around and says I never met a man I didn't like until I met Will Rogers. But I think with Frank, it would be Frank never met a man who didn't like him. He would just had this, I don't know, just a word. I guess the word is charm. Has something to do with the Irish accent, of course.
Right.
Americans go to Ireland and they start talking in this sort of bad imitation of an Irish accent or Irish way of speaking. The reverse is never true. Irish people don't come to America and start talking like Americans and have really no desire to. But I think we don't want to sentimentalize Frank any more than you'd like to sentimentalize Ireland. And yet, in a way, he sentimentalized himself with the way the kind of not just cheerful, but genuinely interested and he seemed like he was always having a good time.
Yeah.
And that's not a trick, but an amazing grace.
Yeah. No, there was a kind of a quality of astonished innocence and, where there was something innocent about at least the presentation. And I think you're right. I mean, he was a finished product. I mean, I think we're probably finished products a lot sooner than 67. We were probably finished products at 6. So, if I may, there's a little excerpt from this essay by Susan Jane Gilman, who was one of his students in high school. And she was at Stuyvesant, which are very good students. And she went on to have a successful career as a novelist and essayist. And part of this little excerpt I will read is kind of to make the point is that Frank was every bit as charming and good and endearing as a high school teacher as he was. I mean, Angela's Ashes or Celebrity didn't amplify that. Angela's Ashes introduced him to a global audience, and it was extraordinary. But this is what Susan Jane Gilman writes. Under his tutelage, I blossom. Suddenly, my yearnings have a focus, and creative writing in room 205 hones my literary skills like a lathe. I began writing and reading voraciously. Dorothy Parker, Langston Hughes, Truman Capote, Samuel Johnson, Mr. McCourt orders, Jonathan Swift. I become his acolyte, a huge groupie. I'm too cool to moon around his desk, so I just make sure to write something every single week for the open mic, then act out short stories and poems before the class, hoping to impress him. To my great relief, everything I submit to Mr. McCourt comes back with stellar grades and words of encouragement. So many students adore him, and that's a word that comes up so many times in reference to Frank, adore. He's the satirist, the cool teacher, the teacher who's so cool. In fact, why is he teaching? Herein lies the irony. We adore and respect him so much. We don't understand for the life of us why he's chosen to stay with us at Stuyvesant. What is he doing? Our hearts break a little for him. He's so talented. He shouldn't be wasting his life with these pathetic Delaney cards and lesson plans. He should be writing a great novel. He should be on stage. Another rumor has it that, in fact, he has written a book, but the manuscript was in his bag that was stolen one day on the train to school. This is before computers, so the manuscript was his only copy. Now the book is gone forever. It's such an awful rumor that no one dares ask him if it's true. So now, whenever I have a professional triumph, an op-ed in the New York Times or a journalism award, I call him. He is as proud as any parent. But in my heart, I feel terrible. It somehow doesn't seem right. He is the major talent here, not me. He does a show with his brother Malachi called A Couple of Blackguards. He retires, he performs a little, he writes a column for the same freebie newspaper that I do. He has so much wit and eloquence and gloriousness, I can't help but feel it's been squandered. He was meant for better. Well, I tell myself one day when I write a great novel, I'll dedicate it to him, my high school English teacher, and that will give him a little bit of glory, some much deserved recognition. Then ha, 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 ha. So the irony is he seemed destined for greatness as a teacher. So we were lucky to have the example of that.
Are we going to show a clip now, or?
Well, listen, I mean, we could start, as a teacher, talk about Frank's career as a teacher. He taught his entire life. He always makes fun of college professors for being, slackers with a lot of justification. He did have one workshop in particular that had a couple of celebrities in it. And it's kind of a nice moment in the workshop. And it's called, if we want to run this, it's called The Hug.
come here every year and we talk about memoir. I have to tell you what the time a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and you've met Alan Alda now for after one appearance or another. I walked into my class up in the second floor, and there were the usual 13 or 14 people there. But on one end of the room was Anne Bancroft. Anne Bancroft! Wrapped up in some kind of a scarf. At the time she was ill, and she died shortly after that. And she's on one end, and I always idolized her ever since The Graduate. Ever since she showed that leg, which I found out later on was not her leg. I wasn't disillusioned. And at the other end of the room is Alan Alda. I said, oh, this is impossible. Oh, we're going to run the class with these two superstars. They're going to suck the oxygen right out of there, but they didn't. And I was telling Alan, and he's now my new best friend, Alan Alda. I don't even hang around with stars now. My new best friend, Alan Alda. I was telling him day before yesterday with my new best friend, at the house of my new best friend, Roger Rosenblatt, that there was something happened in my class during that year, and where a young woman in the class, she seemed to be very young, but she had a 21-year-old son who was suffering from some kind of mental disability, and it was very tragic for her. And she read this piece and stopped, and then she said, I need a hug. At a moment like that, you're the teacher, instructor, what is your role there? Well, I made a slight movement towards hugging her, but Alan was out of his seat. Hugging her. And I wonder if she did that deliberately. Because she knew I was slowing the hug down. I would have done it, but he was first out, and I told him that, and I think ever after, you couldn't say a bad thing about Alan Alda to the people in that class. It was such a lovable action, and I really resented it.
Lovely.
Lovely. Do you want to say something about us teaching?
Well, I just have I have Teacher Man with me, and I'm going to read a passage from that. But I thought I'd just read a couple of paragraphs from the preface to it by Frank, which touches on his celebrity and his age. This is Frank in the prologue to his own book, Teacher Man. F. Scott Fitzgerald said that in American lives, there are no second acts. He simply did not live long enough. In my case, he was wrong. When I taught in New York City high schools for 30 years, no one but my students paid me a scrap of attention. In the world outside the school, I was invisible. Then I wrote a book about my childhood, and I became Mick of the moment. I hoped the book would explain family history to the McCourt children and grandchildren. I hoped it might sell a few hundred copies, and I might be invited to have some discussions with book clubs. Instead, it jumped onto the bestseller list, was translated into 30 languages, and I was dazzled. The book was my second act. In the world of books, I am a late bloomer, a Johnny-come-lately, new kid on the block. My first book, Angela's Ashes, was published in 1996, when I was 66. The second, Tis, in 1999, when I was 69. At that age, it's a wonder I was able to lift the pen at all. So that just gives you a brief kind of helicopter ride over his career. I'm going to read the passage from Teacher Man, if you'd like. I just like to say, it just strikes me, thinking about him and listening to us and watching the clips, that there seemed to be, I guess I was looking for the word like charm, but there was some, I guess the word genuine seems to suit my thinking of Frank, because I mean, I knew him in a couple of dimensions or social situations, but I think there was one Frank. I mean, usually there are roles we play. There seemed to be one Frank, not just in his teaching, in his socializing, and his ordinary speaking voice, but his literary voice is pretty much the same as his speaking voice. Of course, it's nothing to take away from the artistry of it and the fact that it's highly fashioned speech, organized and turned into a kind of poetry, fiction poetry. But there seemed to be, and I found that in the three books, the McCourt trilogy that we just mentioned, Angela's Ashes, Tis, and Teacher Man, there's a common, there's the voice. I mean, it all sounds like Frank. And often when someone dies, a writer dies, people say, well, she or he lives on in their work. Well, that's true in a number of different ways. Maybe the work just survived because it's a book in a library. But with Frank, and this could come at the end of our program, but I'm making a suggestion to all of you listening and watching to read Frank. I mean, if you've read, I started rereading Teacher Man because of this program, and you hear his voice. I mean, he's talking to you in a way that literary personae do not. They're different from the authorial voice is different from the human being's voice. In Frank's case, there seems to be this kind of seamlessness of his teaching life, social life, and literary life, and his voice on the page. So we're trying our best, Bob and I and others, and Alice and Roger Rosenblatt in the background. And we're trying our best to give you a sense of Frank, and to just celebrate him and spend some time thinking about him. But the best thing to do after this program is to go read Frank. Read one of if you haven't read him, definitely read him, or reread him, because there's the voice. He'll start talking to you immediately. So I just had something to say about the three books, and then I'll maybe do something else and then read Teacher Man, whatever you think, Bob, however, how much of the time I'm taking up.
No,
but
take more.
All three books have, not only do they all have Frank's voice, but they're all about the same thing. Someone said all fiction is about one of two things. Either someone goes on a long journey or a stranger rides into town. And in Frank's case, it's both, usually, because all three books involve a character who is a stranger in a strange land. And he is trying to figure out this brave new world that he's in. And he's the stranger who rides into the town in Angela's Ashes, and the town is childhood. In Angela's Ashes, he's trying to figure out how to be a child and how to cope with the circumstances he's being brought up in. In Tis, it's the story of immigration. Even though he was born in the United States, he comes back as a young man, and now he's trying to figure out America. So America is the odd land that the young man is coping with and trying to figure out. And finally, in Teacher Man, obviously the new territory he's trying to figure out is the classroom, high school classroom, and going from one of the most challenging, sort of disruptive, as he describes it, high school to one of the best high schools in New York City. So I find this similarity among the three books, that they, and that's, I think, the grab, that we're always rooting, it's instant sympathy, despite, in addition to the verbal charm. and the verbal wit, were rooting for the character to figure out childhood and survive, to find a place in America, to come to terms with the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
I need to stop talking now.
no, you do not. No, we don't have rules, and no. Also, while you were, over the 8 summers we had with Frank at Southampton Writers Conference, you were spending a lot of time with him, and I was back on campus working. So I think you should take more.
Well, I got to wake up with him. We were in a beautiful guest house. We were the lucky residents of an amazing place on the water in Southampton, and there he'd be in the morning. He would always get up before everybody else, certainly before me, and he was writing a teacher man at the time, so he was doing the 3rd book in the trilogy. So I would almost every morning I would look out from my window where I woke up, and look out at the view of the ocean and all that. And there's Frank almost every morning in another little pool house, actually. And he was sitting there with his back to me and the rest of the world, and writing on legal pads. So he was despite the happy-go-lucky charm, the easygoing jollity of his character, he was a very hard worker, and I think a very dedicated teacher. But there he'd be writing early in the morning. And then we got to, usually the British Open, or just the Open was on. We'd always be there watching that in the afternoon after our classes and rooting for whatever Irish golfers there were. And I do recall one instance where we were sitting out on the back deck of this guest house, and watching a sunset and drinking wine. And at some point, Frank commented and said just a beautifully gorgeous sunset. And I said, "Listen, Frank," I get very stern. I said, "I'm a poet. That's what I do. Sunsets. Okay. You stick with your miserable Irish childhood. And I don't want to hear any more about sunsets or sunrises."
Yeah.
So
well,
it was a joy to be with him.
Did he ever make his way? Did he into your work? I mean, not necessarily into a poem, but how did he influence? Did he influence or show up in any way in your work or shape it in any fashion?
Well, I wrote a poem I've never published about his death. I don't even forget the title of it, actually, but I think the subject matter was too much for me.
Yeah, I hear. Yeah, I think also too is that we talk about his charm and his humor, but the absolute fact was he was a hard worker, probably for being a high school teacher. You had to be, but serious writer and reader. And I remember one time he was commenting to me or others that he read every day. He thought of it as a sacred activity, that reading every day. And so, yeah, he did not get there by humor, but he was serious. And I think there were some other, kinds of fuel that drove his teaching. I mean, it partly, as you say, the outsider. He was, that's driven a lot of writers, and I think that was part of it. And I think there was, and some people have noticed that possibly there was some, anger resulting, from childhood. And if you read Teacher Man a bit, I have a passage from someone who was kind of talking about Teacher Man as well. So if you want to read some from that, I can follow up.
Okay, I'll read a passage that's not long, and it's one that I think one of the ones that he might have cracked himself up reading. So it's in the very beginning of Teacher Man, and he mentioned prior to the thing that he got in trouble on his first day of teaching. This is the first day of teaching anywhere, first day in America teaching. And he mentions that he got into trouble because of a sandwich. The problem of the sandwich started when a boy named Petey called out, "Anyone want a bologna sandwich?" "You kidding? Your mom must hate you giving you sandwiches like that." Petey threw his brown paper sandwich bag at the critic, Andy, and the class cheered. "Fight, fight," they said. "Fight, fight." The bag landed on the floor between the blackboard and Andy's front row desk. I came from behind my desk and made the first sound of my teaching career. Hey, 4 years of higher education at New York University, and all I could think to say was, hey. I said it again, hey. They ignored me. They were busy promoting the fight that would kill time and divert me from any lesson I might be planning. I moved toward Petey and made my first statement. Stop throwing sandwiches. Petey in the class looked startled. This teacher, new teacher, just stopped a good fight. New teachers are supposed to mind their own business and send for the principal or a dean, and everyone knows it's years before they come, which means you can have a good fight while waiting. Besides, what are you going to do with a teacher who tells you to stop throwing sandwiches when you already threw the sandwich? Benny called out from the back of the room, "Hey, teach, he already threw the sandwich. No use telling them don't throw the sandwich. They sandwiches, they're on the floor." The class laughed. There's nothing sillier in the world than a teacher telling you not to do something after you already did it. One boy covered his mouth and said stupid, and I knew he was referring to me. I wanted to knock him out of his seat, but that would have been the end of my teaching career. Besides, the hand that covered his mouth was huge, and his desk was too small for his body. Professors of education at New York University never lectured on how to handle flying sandwich situations. Should I say, "Hey, Petey, get up here and pick up that sandwich," or else? Should I pick it up myself and throw it in the wastebasket to show my contempt for people who throw sandwiches while millions starve all over the world? They had to recognize I was boss, that I was tough, that I'd take none of their shit. The sandwich in wax paper lay halfway out of the bag, and the aroma told me there was more to this than bologna. I picked it up and slid it from its wrapping. It was not any ordinary sandwich where meat is slapped between slices of tasteless white American bread. This bread was dark and thick, baked by an Italian mother in Brooklyn, bread firm enough to hold slices of rich bologna, layered with slices of tomato, onions, and peppers, drizzled with olive oil and charged with tongue-dazzling relish. I ate the sandwich. It was my first act of classroom management. My mouth clogged with sandwich. Now I'm laughing. Attracted the attention of the class. They gawked up at me, 34 boys and girls, average age 16. I could see that the admiration in their eyes. The first teacher in their lives to pick up a sandwich from the floor and eat it in full view. Sandwich man. In my boyhood in Ireland, we admired our one schoolmaster who peeled and ate an apple every day and rewarded good boys with the long peel. These kids watched the oil dribble down my chin to my $2 tie from Klein on the Square.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. You can imagine him cracking up reading that. It's pretty easy to imagine. I'm going to read one short paragraph from another author talking about Frank as a teacher, and we have another clip that we could probably squeeze in after that. But this is from Ann Taylor Fleming, a novelist and journalist who got to know Frank at Sun Valley Writers Conference. Frank was on the conference circuit, and this essay is called "The Delicious Moralist." Begins, no book tugged more at Frank, it seems, than Teacher Man. He saw and sees himself as a teacher before everything, which of course he was for years. That was the story he needed to tell about teaching, which he did with his customary mix of drop-dead funny anecdotes and pointed passions. Underneath that signature McCourt charm, both on and off paper, beats the heart of a true moralist, a man indignant about poverty and how it tears at kids, indignant too at the low expectations those students are met with and the way we diminish the teachers who fight to save them. The only times I have seen Frank truly angry, maybe outraged is a better word, is when he talks about our failing schools, about how we fail them and how they in turn fail our kids. He doesn't preach or harangue or orate, and there will always be, because it's Frank, a funny nugget coming around the corner. But the deep down outrage is there, just as the page of his very first book, you can hear the cry of a kid against the meanness and malice of the world around him. He is a moralist in humorous clothing. That is the best kind, and nobody is better at it than Frank, because the sorrow comes up through your funny bone to your heart.
Very good.
So
Killer last sentence there.
it's a killer last sentence. And another fan. Billy, we haven't really talked a lot about Ireland, but we have another clip, about a 3-minute clip that was another from Frank from the podium. And well, it's usual and fine fiddle.
Well, thank you. That cuts my time down considerably. I don't have to spend so much time here. But thank you very much, all of those. I didn't expect a kind of a roast. I was really, I'm not too happy about that, because I wanted that to be at my wake. And although my father used to say the best time to have a wake is when you're alive, what's the use of having a wake when you're dead? You ought to be alive to hear the compliments and the flattery, especially the remarks on my body, which I certainly appreciate, because I'm tired of being complimented on my mind, my intellect. And I also want to comment on last year I did some complaining. I come from a race of complainers, because we suffer so much under English rule for 800 years, you know, and because of that, we produce great lamentations. Don't talk to me about Jewish lamentation. We are the killers when it comes to lamentation, and we have more immigrant songs. Ethnomusicologists have testified to the fact we produce more immigrant lamentations than any other group. Other groups just simply come to America and they get to work. But we look back over our shoulders across the broad Atlantic to the little Emerald Isle, nesting they under the shadow of the British Empire and so on. Then we sing a song about it. And if the English hadn't invaded us about 800 years ago, we would have been deprived of a great literature, of all the plays of O'Casey and Synge and Yeats and the rest of the boys and girls. You wouldn't have had a song like Kevin Barry, which was dinned into us. We wouldn't have had stories about Irish martyrs being hanged on a Monday morning and going to their death nobly. They always went to their death nobly. And we were always on the verge of kicking the shit out of the British Empire, but at the last minute we were betrayed by an informer. It's the filthiest word in Irish English, informer. Next to that word, Cromwell. Don't mention, if you go into an Irish pub, don't mention the word Cromwell or you'll be out on the street. Somebody told me recently, if you're going to Ireland, maybe some of you are going to Ireland, the best thing to do when you go to Ireland, I always advise people to go to the races, because you see the Irish at their best when they're at the track, betting and watching the horse. They're very keen on horse flesh. But somebody else told me there's a tremendous thing you can go do in Ireland now, where you hear the best stories of all. Go to AA meetings. Hi, my name is Patrick. I'm an alcoholic. And then you get the best stories in the world. All that you're not supposed to divulge them. So if you don't know what to do with yourself in Ireland, douse some whiskey on your head and stumble into an AA meeting.
Interesting to me is that I think that's a very serious subject that he's talking about. And I was I'm thinking that it's a situation where his charm is really working against him because he's so charming, he's so funny, and I think people and everyone's enjoying themselves in his company. But I think for to switch gears for a minute for Frank McCourt, he's talking about something of historical seriousness and importance, but they continue to laugh. You know, one thing I was just thinking of kind of sentimentally is that we'll never know the fourth book. And I don't know what it could be, because maybe it would be about celebrity, because he's conquered all these worlds of childhood in America and teaching. And finally he conquered literature by becoming a literary hero. All those books are autobiographical, right? They're not memoirs exactly, but well, you could call them memoir. I'm not going to quibble about genre, but they're all Frank. It's all Frank all the time. And when we were one evening in Southampton, he said to me that his next book, the fourth book, he said, "I'm so tired of writing about myself. I'm going to write a biography of Napoleon."
So, well, you know, some of those clips, I mean, I began this by saying it's really hard to recall how extraordinary a presence he was. And I hope, you know, some of those clips brought him back for you. And I think probably our time is coming to a close here. I did want to mention one thing about this, really a collector's item, is this TSR that has just it's 200 pages about Frank. I'm going to talk to Alice, and we can, Luann Walker, the editor, wants to donate copies to Bird Books. And so I think Alice may email you, and those of you who actually want to see more of it, I would encourage you to reach out to her. And Billy, any final words?
I think I just said them, unfortunately. But,
you did. They were perfect.
Thinking about, well, what I said before, I'll just have to repeat that. I just suggest that we all read tomorrow or tonight or the day after or this weekend. We go back and read Frank again. He's right there, ready to talk to you. Just open the book and he'll start.
Perfect. We will leave you with this final image of Frank. And thank you for joining us.
My name is Frank McCourt, and I'm awfully sorry I can't be with you this evening to introduce Roger Rosenblatt. I had to do that again.